and so the video and audio are both delayed by the same amount. So I just want to start. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Noah, in case anybody doesn't recognize my voice. You'll see my face a little later when I'm answering questions, but first I want to go through some things on the website, show you where things are at. I'm going to do a quick summary of the changes to the rules that have become effective on June 25th, which was last Thursday. And then we'll have lots and lots of time to answer your questions. So you can write your questions in the Q&A box at any time as we go along, and I will look at them and answer as many as I can after my quick summary. And then you guys can also give me feedback about how this format works. Yeah, so this is the Hazardous Waste homepage. Hopefully most of you are very familiar with this page. You have it bookmarked on your computer. I put a new link here right at the top to the rules page, so you don't have to scroll down to get to them. And then the announcements, I'm sure that you've all seen the announcements because you managed to find the link to come to this event. But just a reminder, if you didn't get too much of a chance to look at the rest of the announcements, there are a couple of other new announcements here about e-manifest reports that are available to industry users in the RCRA Info Industry app. And then this new EPA enforcement alert about air emissions. So if this applies to your facility, they call this AABBCC, the RCRA air rules. This is something that you definitely want to read. So without further ado, the rules page. So I've preloaded all these pages because my computer is running pretty slow. But if you click here, you'll get to the rules page. And if anybody did not receive the email, the announcements directly, you want to subscribe to the mailing list by just putting your address in here and clicking subscribe. So there's a few new things here besides just the new rules. I wanted to point this out, and I forgot to put it in that announcements email because there were so many other things going in there, but I created this new document called How to Cite Hawaii Administrative Rules, chapters 11-260.1 to 11-279.1. So that's all of the hazardous waste rules. I had instructions about how to do these citations on the first page of every guidebook, but apparently my instructions were not good enough because it's fairly complicated. So I created this new document for you, and this is on one legal-sized piece of paper, so you can print it out and put it up next to your desk for those of you who are citing the regulations all the time. As you all know already, since 2017, when we switched our rules over to incorporation by reference, citing a specific part of the rules has gotten a little complicated because you actually need to cite the specific section number of the federal rules as it's incorporated and amended in the Hawaii state rules. So this first table here just shows, reading across each row, what federal Code of Federal Regulations part is incorporated with amendments in what chapter of our Hawaii administrative rules. And all of these are done in section 1 of their respective chapter. And so that means when you're citing, you can either cite as incorporated and amended in the chapter, or you can cite as incorporated and amended in section 1 of that chapter, and those are both correct. So I created a few examples here. So hopefully this little table with these 3 examples is going to be really helpful. So if you're wanting to cite the regulations for a small quantity generator in the Hawaii rules, you're looking for the analog to federal section 40 CFR section 262.16. By the way, this little thing just means section. So the way that you would cite that would be 40 CFR section 262.16 as incorporated and amended in section 11-262.1-1 HAR, or you could say 40 CFR section 262.16 as incorporated and amended in chapter 11-262.1 HAR. So these are just, different ways that you can do it. They're all correct. But you have to make sure that you're picking the correct chapter number that corresponds to what you're looking for. So if it's the federal 273, it's going to be the state 273.1. So the only one that's a little wonky is the federal part 124 subparts A and B are incorporated in the state chapter 11-271.1. So that one probably you guys never cite those rules, but if you do, you have to remember where that is, and the rest of them kind of make sense because they're the same number plus the 0.1, right? Okay, so that's that. And then right now the rules that are posted here are unofficial copies of the rules. I'm working on getting the official copies. Most of you probably don't care about that because you don't use these. The important thing for you are the guidebooks, which are available. All of them are posted now with and without the track changes. So just like it was before, but now it's going to be a different document when you click on it. So if you have any of the guidebooks bookmarked on your browser, on your computer, right now, those bookmarks will still work, but they're giving you the old guidebook. So I'm going to take down all of those documents, but it would be best if you bookmark this page. And I also strongly recommend that you download the PDFs and use the PDFs on your machine, and rather than, using a browser version like this every time you're looking at a guidebook. And the reason for that, probably you know this already, but I just want to show you in case you don't know, that the guidebooks, okay, I have to change what I'm sharing on my screen so you can see. Get to my Adobe here. Okay, so the guidebooks, when you download the PDF, have bookmarks in them. And so the table of contents is bookmarked so that you can click on something in the table of contents and it will take you to that section. But Adobe also has this bookmarks bar, which is really handy. So if it doesn't already appear, you click on this little icon on this little skinny bar on the left, and that will open it. And so this is just a really easy way to navigate around to whatever you're looking for. So I highly recommend using the guidebooks that way as a PDF with the bookmarks. Okay, and I think that's all I want to say about that. So let me go back to sharing my internet. And here is the list. Oh, let me show you where this is. So if you scroll down past the table with all the chapters and guidebooks in it, this link here, the explanation of proposed amendments from last December. A lot of you probably have seen this already. We talked about it when we had the public meeting for these rules, which I think was in February, might have been at the end of January, maybe January. This is the same document because we adopted everything that we proposed, so I didn't write up a new one. So this is the list of all the changes, and so it's just explaining. The main thing is that we're updating the EPA rules that we've incorporated from the July 1st, 2017 version to the July 1st, 2019 version. And then we have a few other changes that are bulleted here. These are not EPA rules, but are just state-initiated changes, and most of them are really corrections and clarifications. So nothing really big that we're introducing outside of keeping up with the federal rules. So I'm just going to quickly go over this list. And as I go, if you have questions about a particular thing, remember you can write your question into the Q&A box before I get to the end of this list. You don't have to wait. So the first thing is just the AES filing compliance date for hazardous waste exports. So this is for the automated export system. Basically paperwork that you have to file with EPA if you're exporting hazardous waste. And so we just put the date into the rules so that it's really clear when that date is. Number 2, confidentiality determinations for hazardous waste export and import documents. EPA made this announcement that you cannot claim confidentiality about the information that's on these documents that you submit to EPA for import and export. And so this was already, like the first rule actually, already in effect because these federal rules are adopted under HSWA authority. That's the Hazardous and Solid Waste Amendments of 1984. It's just a different federal authority that makes the rules effective even in authorized states before the states adopt them so that it's uniform nationwide. And so for import and export things, because they're handled by EPA, they just become effective immediately. So this actually doesn't really change anything. It just puts it into the state rules. And actually the same thing is true for number 3. So the e-manifest system, because it is EPA's system, the new statutory authority that the e-manifest system is established under is also an authority that makes the rules effective immediately across the country. So this e-manifest user fee rule that gives all of the complex calculations for how EPA is figuring out the user fee for different kinds of manifests was already effective, but now we've adopted it into our state rules. And most of you probably aren't too interested in that. The fees are paid by the TSDFs. So your treatment, storage, or disposal facility that you're sending waste to on the mainland is paying a per manifest fee. And I'm sure that you've all seen that fee kind of trickle down to what it costs to send off your waste. Okay, so number 4, this is one of the more interesting and complicated EPA rules that are in this list, but I don't know if you guys are actually interested in it. So I'm going to give a really brief summary and ask you to let me know if you want to hear more about this. So the 2015 definition of solid waste rule was adopted by Hawaii in our 2017 rules. So the first time we did the incorporation by reference. And some of the provisions of this rule were challenged in court, and the court determined them to be not allowable. And so the court issued what's called a vacatur, vacating certain parts of the rule, and then EPA made another rule, which they call the 2018 DSW rule, or the response to the vacatur, that changes those portions of the rule. So the main thing that it does is, rather than having the verified recycler exclusion for hazardous secondary material, there's a transfer-based exclusion instead. And then the other thing is that it changes the 4 factors of the definition of legitimate recycling, where the 4th factor becomes, rather than being a requirement, it's a consideration. So that factor is called toxics along for the ride, and it's basically looking at a product that you've made using hazardous secondary materials and seeing whether there's a higher level of hazardous constituents in there than you would expect in a comparable product. And so the change is that if there is a higher level of hazardous constituents, it doesn't just automatically invalidate that recycling. It could still be legitimate recycling if there are other considerations about exposure routes and the bioavailability of that constituent that make it still sort of okay and safe for that product to have it in there. So we can go into more detail there if you guys are interested in that rule. But as far as I know, there's nobody who's really using these conditional exclusions for hazardous secondary material that's being recycled. If you are, I would really love to talk to you offline to make sure that you understand what the rules are for that. The legitimate recycling definition does apply to all recycling of hazardous waste. So we could also, you know, those two things can be split apart. And if people are interested in talking only about the definition of legitimate recycling and not about hearing about the conditional exclusions, we can go over that. Okay, number 5. One of the offices at EPA where people submit forms changed their address, and the address is in the rules, so they had to make a rule to change where you send the forms. So we're adopting that rule. Done. Number 6, the airbags rule. This rule came out at the end of November in 2018. So you may remember we actually sent out an email announcement the day before the rule was published by EPA saying you can follow this rule immediately. So our policy has been that you could already use this rule if you're dealing with airbags. Now we've formally adopted it. But basically it's a conditional exclusion for airbag waste, not to have to be managed as RCRA hazardous waste while it's being collected and then transported to an airbag collection site. So this is to facilitate getting defective airbags out of cars faster. And if anybody is interested, I can go into a little more detail on this one. Number 7, amendments to the P075 listing for nicotine. I know a lot of people were really glad to see this go through. So this is excluding unused FDA-approved over-the-counter nicotine replacement patches, gums, and lozenges from the definition of P075 waste. And I'm sure that everybody knows this was part of a big rule called the pharmaceutical rule. We have not adopted the pharmaceutical rule at this time. It's going to be in the next rule package. But this change to the listing for P075 was severable and sort of easy to adopt on its own. So basically, because of your requests, because the regulated community was very interested in seeing this go through as quickly as possible, we were able to just put it into this rule package. So those things are no longer going to be regulated hazardous waste. And that's the end of the list of federal rules that are included in this rule change. So the rest of this stuff, like I said, is pretty minor, but you know, this document is a requirement for transparency of rulemaking so that everybody has the opportunity to comment on proposed rules. We really have to list out every single change that we're making. So we made corrections and we made formatting changes. And some people might be interested in this. Again, not really a change because we were already allowing it, but conforming the language for contingency plans for treatment, storage, and disposal facilities to allow the use of an emergency telephone number, which could be a work cell phone number, where it used to say home address and phone number of the emergency coordinator. So this just makes the language the same as what was adopted for generators. The last rulemaking we did, which picked up the generator improvements rule, because this was an improvement for large quantity generators to, you know, just update this from the 80s when there were no cell phones. And then we just have a few clarifications, putting in dates instead of the effective date of this chapter, adding a definition of authorized state or approved state. I want to thank Randall Hu for this C here, adding a reference to the definition of solvent contaminated wipes in the conditional exclusion section that talks about them, because in order for solvent contaminated wipes to meet the conditions of the exclusion, they also have to meet the definition of solvent contaminated wipes that's in the rules. And that's not really a self-evident definition. So we just put in a reference to where to go find the definition there. D is just clarifying that these codes F020 to F027 are acute hazardous waste codes, at one spot where it wasn't clarified. I think that, you know, if you've read the guidebook for chapter 11-262.1, since we adopted the generator improvements rule the last time, you'll see that there are a lot of places where it's much clearer what acute hazardous waste is and how it's talked about. I think EPA did a really good job with that in the generator improvements rule. So this is sort of a conforming change to that. And then the last one is just a change to the language in our incorporated 40 CFR section 260.2. And this is talking about confidentiality determinations when you're making a claim of business confidentiality to EPA or to the Department of Health for a document that you've given to one of those agencies for something relating to hazardous waste. And so that's it. That's the whole list. And I'm gonna stop talking and check out what you guys have written in the Q&A box. So let me see if I can turn my camera on and change this so that you see me. Oh, I look really washed out. I probably need to turn on the light in the room. I'm sitting in front of a window here. Maybe that will help. Nope, it doesn't help. Well, you get the ghost version of me. Okay, so somebody asked, is this being recorded? My computer audio is not working, but I'd like to listen to this. So I hope your audio is working enough that you can hear me say, yes, it is actually being recorded. I'm gonna have to go back and figure out how to edit the recording because it's gonna have a whole lot of blank airtime at the beginning. But yes, this is being recorded. It's sort of a little experiment because, like I said, it's the first time I'm using the Teams live event. But one of the features is that it automatically records the whole session. Okay, and then we have a question from Joni regarding the nicotine ruling. Since it only excludes unused, please clarify if used, removed patches, chewed gum, empty wrappers are still treated as hazardous waste. I believe the answer to that is yes, they would still be hazardous waste because they are not unused. So the way that this particular change actually works is that in the listing 4P075, that whole phrase that I read, unused, FDA approved, over the counter, is included in the listing as an exclusion. So let me see if I can pull that up really quick and then share my screen so you can see what it says. And then we will know the answer for sure. I always look things up because Best way to know for sure. Okay, so I'm here. Oh, you're still seeing me though. Hold on. How do I make it so you're seeing this? Okay, that should do it. So we're here in the track changes guidebook for 261.1. And because these tables are really long and this is the only change we've made to them, we just have a link to the federal tables and then a list of the things that have been changed. So for P075, it says nicotine and salts. This listing does not include patches, gums, and lozenges that are FDA-approved over-the-counter replacement therapies. Ah, interesting. So it doesn't actually say unused here, which means I don't know the answer to this question, and I'm going to have to go look in the Federal Register. I think that the reason that unused was in my rationale document is because it was said by EPA somewhere in their Federal Register notice. So I'm going to have to look into that and get back to you. If you would send me an email, I'm going to publish this question and then respond to it with my email address so everybody can see my email address here. I know you all have my email address, but there it is again. So Joni, if you would send me an email reminding me to respond to this question for you, that would be really great. It's possible that the reason it says unused is because in most of the circumstances where a business will be generating these wastes, they'll be unused. But I can see how maybe in a hospital setting, you could end up with a used waste that was still generated by the business. Okay, so those are all of the questions that are written in the Q&A box right now.